Hello, Neopians. I just recorded this entire broadcast on mute. So, we make mistakes. One. And number two, I guess this means that you will receive this art gallery guide rehearsed doubly. So, to your benefit. But for today's stream, we will be doing something a bit different from our norm, or at least what you may have seen on the channel. Instead of creating var wolves or playing flash games or, looking back at some of my favorite customs, today I'm going to share with you some tips and tricks for one of my favorite areas of the Neopets site, which is the art gallery. With me being a returning Neopets player, having returned to the site around late 2023, and being a childhood player, and I say childhood with an asterisk because my friends and I not only played Neopets during elementary school, but also for many years after it was definitely not cool to obsess over pixelated pets anymore. But when I was younger, it was one of my dreams to be featured in something like the art gallery or the Neopian Times. And back then, it was really difficult and honestly really discouraging because I could never get in. And now being an adult Neopets player, um, and looking back, it was super understandable. I mean, Neopets was one of the most popular websites on the internet back then, and the quality and depth of the talent was sky high. And the depth is certainly there right now, but nowadays in the site's renaissance, um, it's less crowded. So now there is plenty of room for those with creative inklings to shine and gain recognition and build confidence. Um, for me, in terms of my journey with the art gallery since my return, it all started when I wanted to jazz up my user lookup with some trophies. If you've seen some of my past streams, you may know that I set a lofty goal of earning every single trophy, which included the creative contest trophies. And after tackling, the flash games, etc., I had to turn my attention to these contests. And as I've grown older, writing has become a bit of a strength of mine. I wasn't super worried about the storytelling contest, the poetry contest, the Neopian Times. But visual skill is something that is a mighty mountain to climb for me. I am unable to draw, and I, at the time, had little to no experience with crafts. But in this year and a quarter or so of submitting to the art gallery, I've improved. I've had success, and I've been able to get myself to the point where I'm able to regularly succeed. In the past year, I've created between 100 and 200 projects for the art gallery across about 70 contests. And I've had about 35 wins. And um, I guess you can see, if you see on this graphic, you can see some of the evolution, I guess, of my journey creating pieces for the art gallery. So, you know, number one, I primarily started making fuse bead pieces. First, I was kind of recreating, like I guess avatars, which have a bit of a pixel element. But now I work on, as you can see with the Gellert next to the walkie, I work on many pieces, freehand these days. Um, then I started venturing into clay pieces and I began making really small, anything that was similar to a ball, pretty much like this Kiko that's in the middle. But since, now I've been making, I guess you might call them impressionistic pieces, as you can see with this Halloween Bori. And, as I mentioned, hand drawn art or graphic art was something I viewed as kind of like the ultimate limitation. I have a wobbly hand. I'm left handed. I blame it on that. But I have also even started making animations. And this pink chocolate Fairy piece, you can't see right here, but a little, bit of whipped cream drops on its head and it goes, yay. So, um, I'd say that the most important takeaway or benefit that I've had in this past, over a year of working on pieces of the art gallery has been the confidence building. Not only the confidence building to work on different mediums of neo art, but, holistically as a creative, even for the writing to, be okay with making a type of piece I wouldn't have been okay with before, making videos and content, for example. I've been, certainly more adventurous, and I haven't been afraid to share that adventurous, ambitious, and I haven't been afraid to share that ambition. So, you know, if I can do it, I guess what I want to say is that you can do it too. And why am I making this video? I guess the reason is what I hope people can learn is, how to plan and prepare for the art gallery, how to make your art stand out again for the art gallery, the submission process and the rules, the housekeeping business, I guess, of the art gallery, but most importantly, how to stay motivated. And I think this section, has tips for any creative or any artist on how to maintain their sanity, whether it's for the art gallery or for not. I think there's a lot of lessons that you can, apply to the rest of life, for example. So, to begin, before we start that, why should you enter the art gallery? Again, as I mentioned before, my journey started with wanting to get the trophy for my lookup. The trophy is quite spiffy. It's got this this Scorchio holding a landscape. And let's imagine that that's a uni looking at the sun or something that's on there. Um, but, when you do win, you also get a prize. And there are some excellent prizes in the prize pool. Um, I put in this graphic the Colt Sand stamp. There are maybe, I think, 6 amazing stamps that you can get from the Creative Contest prize pool. Again, that prize pool is shared between the Art Gallery, Poetry Contest, Storytelling Contest, and the Neopian Times. It is There are a lot of prizes in the pool. More often than not, you'll get a dud. Maybe it'll be a pet pet. Maybe it'll be a pet pet pet. Maybe it'll be a code stone or a Nerkmid paintbrush, pet pet paintbrush. I believe it's a 3% chance of getting, a big prize like one of these, elusive stamps. And, all it takes is winning one once, and, you've changed your neo rich. You're part of the neo 1%. And if you dreamed of owning a bunch of stamps, you could sell it and then buy a bunch, right? And finally have that. Or if you wanted a gourmet pet, you could pursue that goal. So, if that is an area of interest, that is a reason to enter the art gallery for sure. But I am going to say it is extremely rare. But the most important reason you should enter the art gallery is to become more connected with the art community and the creative community. Again, the Neopets community is very rich in terms of talent. Because of Neopets, there are people who learned to draw, to program, to do so many different things. And, there's so many different types of people you'll become connected with and draw inspiration from and gain confidence from. So I think that third reason is the most important. So moving on to my tips for the art gallery. First is to plan ahead and stay connected. Plan ahead and stay organized. And to do so, before you begin any project, I suggest checking the art gallery schedule on the Neo boards. The contest judge posts on the Neo board, specifically the art boards, a schedule typically for the month. The post is going to be posted from an official TNT account, usually the TNT contest judge account, as you can see in this graphic. Um, that account's posts will be highlighted in blue on the board, so they should stick out. Um, and it's usually on the first page, but sometimes it'll drift the second or third page. So, if you're not seeing it on the first page, just click through to the other pages of the boards and you should find it. And on those topics, the first post will also be highlighted in blue, and it'll contain a list of dates as well as the corresponding themes for those dates. The themes can range from pet day themes, so Yusul Day. This Friday is Shoiru Day, for example. They can reference holidays, so this past Tuesday was April Fool's Day themed. There's usually a Discovery of Meridel themed gallery, a Tyranian Invasion Day theme, for example. There could be characters on sites as the theme, so Fiora, Jadora, Illusin. And there are sometimes some themes that are just kind of come up with by the judge. There might be, back to school theme. There could be, for example, a summer vacation or a campfire themed, for example. The last category of themes is random days. And you can think of a random day as a non-theme day. Any miscellaneous piece of work can be submitted for that day and is applicable. So I will touch more on random days and how you should strategize for those later in this guide. But if, sometimes people are confused as to what a random day is, and there you go. So again, on the note of planning ahead and staying organized, the way that I find that I stay organized with my projects is by setting aside a regular window of time to work on them. There's two ways you can approach this. You can set maybe a weekly short period of time and do maybe 30 minutes for a week, let's say, to work on your piece. Maybe you're working on digital art and it's easy to access the file and just do little bits of your project. But for me, since I tend to work on craftier projects, it's easier for me to work on them in one sitting. And I like to set aside a chunk of time on the weekends to work on something like this. Also on that note is this idea of like budgeting your time wisely, just investing. You might want to invest 10 hours on a masterpiece. But the more time you invest on a piece isn't necessarily going to increase your chances of getting into the gallery. That's not to say you can't, pour your heart into masterpieces from time to time, but given the fact that there are only so many slots for winners, I'd recommend spending maybe 1 to 2 hours on your piece maximum. And it may be difficult to do that at the beginning, especially if you're learning a new craft, but, try to, over time, work on disciplining yourself and scoping out projects that can fit within that window. And, the reason for these tips is to stay consistent. In my experience, as the community and the contest judge becomes more familiar with your work, you'll tend to have more success. I'd say, creativity, you can compare it to a muscle. You need to flex it a lot to get stronger. And in terms of creativity, as you're working on more projects and flexing that creative brain, your own style will emerge, and that will be reflected in, again, people's familiarity with you, your work, and your success in the contest, in my opinion. And, again, budgeting your time wisely and setting aside a regular window of time to work on your projects will help you stay consistent, and build up, good artistic habits. And, I think a lot of times when I speak with people who are interested in entering the contests but are maybe afraid to do so, is that they think they have to be a pro. And you don't have to be a pro to enter the contest, because the contests are open to all skill levels. Whether you're an expert or a novice, there is a space for you. The contest judge likes to select pieces that are from a broad range or spectrum of skill levels, mediums, subjects, etc. So, don't let your perceived skill level be the reason you don't, take this chance. And you only get, everyone has to start from somewhere, right? So the only way you're going to get better is if you start. If the reason you don't start is because you haven't started, try to put that reason to bed. And, I guess my goal is to have this piece of advice encourage you to think that way. And, to give an example, here are some of my earliest pieces accepted to the art gallery. To the right, you could see is this spring cirrus, cirrus cloud. And, it's a little rough. I think I made it when the cirrus came out, as a pet, coincidentally. Um, so that kind of helped it getting into the contest. It was submitted for a spring themed contest about a year ago. And then this clay cougar to the left, I was looking to get into clay. I saw a tiger clay tutorial. I found a few and I kind of took some ideas from all of them and made this. So, you know, this is just some firsthand experience with where you can be at the beginning and still have success. Um, and again, you don't need to be a digital artist to submit for the art gallery. Many different art styles are accepted. Again, there's digital and traditional, maybe more visual hand-drawn art, but crafts are accepted as well. I have some friends who work with jewelry and paper crafts. Again, I do the beads and the clay. There's people who make 3D models and things like that, or 3D renderings in some sort of computer program, and all of those are accepted by the contest. Maybe to me, hand drawn graphic art is very intimidating, just because it seems difficult to pick up, especially pick up quickly. And so, picking to work on crafts at the beginning helped me build a lot of confidence to then eventually, take up the more graphic skills later on, for example. So that can be a way to enter the contest. And then I guess the last totality is what matters most to the judge is that there's creativity and effort in the project. So that can come in many forms. I mean, again, something that looks like it was whipped up together in 2 minutes might not show that level of effort, right? So, if you poured your heart into it, and, let's say there's someone who has been drawing for 20 years, and in 10 minutes, they're able to draw like, wow, a masterpiece, right? And for you, it might take 2 hours to do that, to do something not at that level. Don't be intimidated, because the effort is going to show, right? Um, in terms of creativity, right? There's people that I saw, for example, for I think Grundo Day, they made a sponge Grundo out of a sponge. That was a super creative idea. Once I submitted a a salad slorg, and I put a clay slorg in a salad, right? And maybe the inventiveness is what's shown. So everybody has their strengths. It's just kind of up to you to listen to them and to show them, right? Um, how to make your art stand out. So, needless to say, when there are, I don't know, maybe hundreds of people submitting to these contests, does close to 100, and some people might be submitting multiple pieces. hundreds of entries, let's say, to a contest. It's important for your art to stand out to the contest judge. The contest judge is going to be viewing the pieces as like a grid of small images, right? And their eye is going to have to be drawn to your piece versus another piece. They're not able to spend hours looking at every piece. The contest judge has a whole other job in addition to the judge of judging the contest. They love the contest, they admire the contest, and their heart is in the contest. But we do have to recognize that um, we need to do our best to capture their attention. And so, one tip is to choose unique subjects or colors. So, let's say, for example, it's Skeeth Day, okay? Um, a lot of people might be submitting King Skarl or King Hagen. Um, so maybe it might be smarter to pick the National Neopian Bank Manager or Malchus Vile as the subject of your piece. In terms of colors, right? The plushy and the fairy skeeth are some of the most popular. So maybe picking another color like Dargan could be a great way to stand out, or Wraith. Um, and then in terms of color, I don't just mean the color of the Neopet, but also the colors used in the piece. Like, you know, pink might be a very popular color. What are the hues that you can use in a grid of all pink images, for example, to make the eye drawn to your piece? Maybe for that particular theme, including more blues in your work could help. Um, Another way to stand out, and I'm definitely a benefit, I benefit from this, is by grabbing attention with unique or quirky mediums. I mentioned the sponge piece. I mentioned you can work with food. I think for Cy Bunny Day, someone made a Cy Bunny canapé, for example, that was edible. There's tons of jewelry pieces and paper art pieces. So, if you struggle with creating visual art that stands out, you can do so through other mediums. Um, you know, let's say you're not the most gifted graphic artist, but you can make a short animation. This is something that I've done. That could be another way to stand out, putting some movement in the piece that you're submitting. And as I kind of mentioned before, the art is viewed as at a thumbnail size. So, it's going to look very small to the judge, and we have to motivate them to click on this actual piece to view it. And that's why it's important to make sure the subject is really large in the frame and not something small and kind of far off. So that way, they're motivated to look at your work and consider your work further. So, a very important tip for success in the art gallery, especially long term, is to work smarter, not harder. Um, Needless to say, if you're setting aside time to work on these projects, um, some weeks you might have more time to spare than others. So, when we have less time, this tip of working smarter rather than harder is very important. And one way we can do so is by reducing, reusing, and recycling our art or repackaging old art for new themes. So let's say we had a piece that wasn't accepted for Fiora Day in May and Fairy Festival approaches in September. We can maybe repackage a work about Fiora for maybe a Fairy Festival themed gallery. Maybe I'm just submitting the piece verbatim, but oftentimes the judge does like to see that something was made for that day. So maybe swapping out a background could be something simple that you can do. And by reducing, reusing, and recycling your art, you can free up more time to work on more projects further down the road. So let's say it's the beginning of the month, and I know I have a few pieces in my bank of content that I've amassed for one gallery. I can then focus on the gallery 2 weeks out and get kind of ahead of the curve. Um, and then lastly, as I mentioned before, I'll discuss random theme days, but the random theme days are essentially unthemed days. Any type of piece is game. They can be quite competitive because a lot of people are submitting multiple pieces on those days. But I recommend on submitting old work for those days. And once you have enough content, maybe not making new work for those days unless you have the time. That way, again, you can kind of get ahead of the curve on the work. So, something that this is kind of more technical, but it's important to adhere to the submission requirements of the art gallery when submitting your pieces and to keep that in mind as you're creating your pieces. It would suck working on something for hours and for the file size to be too large to submit, for example. So, here are some of the requirements to keep in mind. The image size can be no longer than 600 by 600. Um, so, if you're working on a canvas that's like 3000 pixels by 3000 pixels, the file that you export at the end will have to be no larger than 600 by 600. And you can do 600 by 600 exactly. It doesn't need to be square dimensions, it can be rectangular. So you could do like 600 by 400, anything of that sort, so long as no dimension is bigger than 600 pixels. Files must be JPEG or GIF, GIF. And to be clear, .jpeg is not accepted. It has to be .jpg. And this usually isn't a problem when you're exporting on a computer. I've run into this issue when exporting on my phone. Maybe I took a picture of my phone and I was on the go and wanted to submit on the go. It was kind of difficult to find something that could give me just a .jpg. The system just won't let you submit at all if it's .jpeg. That's just something to keep in mind. Um, and files need to be under 80 kbs. For animations, this can be quite stifling because they quickly rack up file size, and as they get compressed, they get quite distorted. Um, for crafts, where I'm just taking a photo of something and maybe cropping it, that's usually not a problem whatsoever. Um, the system won't let you submit if it's too big. So, and actually, if your program says it's 80 kbs, it's probably like 80.001, and therefore it's too big. So I always get everything to 79. And then lastly is the timing. It's important to submit your piece close to when the contest is going to be judged. So, for example, if Friday, for example, is going to be Shoiru Day. If Monday, the following Monday, is going to be Koi Day, it is important that I don't submit my piece until after Shoiru Day. And ideally, the night before Koi Day or the day of the Koi Day contest listed on the schedule. Okay. If I submit for the previous contest, my work will be basically they'll delete the library of content that was submitted and clear out some memory in the system once a contest is judged. So if I submit my Koi piece ahead of Shoiru Day, Friday Shoiru Day, come Monday, it'll be cleared from the system and it'll be ineligible and my submission will have been for naught. So for me, in my experience, the most effective times to submit are the night before or the morning of NST of the contest that you're submitting for. So in the case of Koi Day, if it's a Monday, the morning of Monday would be the best time. And if in my time zone I would be asleep at the time, I would do the night before, as close as possible to the contest. That way the judge will see your submission at the top of the pile and likely, actually have the time to look at it. And the last set of tips, which I find to be the most important and applicable not just for the art gallery, but also for life as a creative or just life in general, which is to not get discouraged. I think a lot of people who are trying to get into the contest or trying to become regulars in the contests, I often hear them voice discouragement. Maybe they're trying to get their first acceptance and they haven't been accepted for a couple rounds, and there's a phrase I see uttered a lot, which is that I'm getting rejected. And to be clear, not getting accepted is not the same as being rejected. It just means that other people were accepted. There's 12 spots for each page of the art gallery, and for each contest, maybe 2 pages go live. 24 pieces get accepted. In a way, it's kind of random, right? So, there's no point in beating yourself down further mentally because the result hasn't arrived. And, at the end of the day, in life, for anything, especially when we're creating anything, the only thing that we can guarantee is our joy in the process. So, in terms of these pieces, I say enjoy the process rather than the reward. You know, pick an art form that you enjoy doing, and the act of doing the art form is a release enough for you where you're getting a fulfillment out of it in totality. Winning the contest is the icing on the cake, right? It's not expected. Try not to think about the day that the contest is judged and just go to your inventory and see if you have a prize, right? And that's how you'll know. But um, since the only thing that is in our control and in our hands, I say what's important to have longevity with creating is, again, managing the way that we handle negativity. I'm going to say negativity. I'm not going to say rejection because, again, you're not receiving rejection just because you are not being accepted. I'd say how to handle not succeeding, I'd say. And then lastly, again, keep trying. Maybe it's you're trying to get in the contest for the first time. Most people don't get in the first time, right? It takes a few iterations. Over the course of going through these iterations, you're flexing your creative muscle and you are becoming a stronger creator. You're developing your own style. You are, learning different techniques from different references and building your own repertoire of references as you progress. Maybe you are a regular and you have gotten to the art gallery a lot. I have been in this position where you get in a lot and then you go through spells of not getting in at all. And it can be very discouraging. But in those moments, you have to, continue to persevere because it'll change and you'll be getting in every week all of a sudden, right? So it's important to, when you are feeling down, to not make that an excuse to just completely stop. And that brings us to the end where I want to recap again. For the art gallery, I'd say it's important to plan your submissions ahead, stay organized, stay consistent. Again, remember that all skill levels and all crafts are welcome. You can find something, an area that's, perfect for you and be open to be adventurous and explore that. Make sure your work is unique and stands out. And, lastly, enjoy the process rather than the reward. And that is a guide to the art gallery.